Welcome the chosen ones. The most dangerous person in a room full of manipulators is the one they can't control, but presumably said by a selected one just before leaving a cult meeting like a boss. You weren't meant to live through their ceremonies. You weren't supposed to be able to see through their robes and rehash chants, and you surely weren't intended to go away without being hurt, bent, or spiritually bulletproof. But here you are, and now they're fascinated, not because they admire you, but because they're afraid of what you accomplished that they couldn't figure out. By being genuine, you disturb the fundamental basis of their fake godhood. Let's be honest. A lot of cult leaders aren't magical prophets. They are narcissists who are insecure and think they are God and have a Wi-Fi password. But everything changed when you got into their circles. You didn't do what you were told. You bent the grid, and instead of changing you, they began to want you. Why? Because you show them. This is a fact. Psychologists have looked at the guru effect, which is when individuals believe things that aren't true, if you say it with enough confidence and incense. But selected ones, you have the spiritual Wi-Fi password straight from the source. You don't simply know what's wrong. You may feel the room's vibration lessen. They attempted to learn from you, duplicate you, and control you, but in the end, they were completely obsessed with you. What was intended to be a fight between good and evil morphed into a love story and a loss of identity. Now they're laying awake, doubting everything they believe, and composing poems about you in their leather-bound diary. So get ready. We're going to show you what happens when a genuine one goes into a fake kingdom in this video. When a chosen one enters into a hall of false prophets, the entire temple shakes. And in the end, they didn't want to be in charge of you. They wanted to be like you. Let's get started. First of all, you didn't seduce them. You messed up their spell work. They didn't love you. They were shocked by what they couldn't change. In reality, they had constructed a whole empire on lies, false light, and charm. Their idea of love was really control, but they hid it under a spiritual mask. But then you came in. You didn't take part in the game. Their titles, candles, or lyrical phrases didn't put you under a spell. You didn't give in to their vibe. You stood by yourself. That scared them. You didn't get them to want you. You messed them up. People like these don't want to be equal. They're looking for sources of energy and spirits they can connect with. They use phrases like alignment and spiritual unity to mask their hunger. But what they actually want is power. Take charge. To worship. And most people do what they're told. Fast. But you didn't. You were like lightning in a cave. You didn't need their approval. You didn't need them to tell you you were right. You already knew who you were. That's when everything changed. Because when a selected one comes in, they don't take in the mood. They show it. You didn't strive to modify them. You were just. And that presence brought to light all the bad things they sought to hide. It was never about how you looked, what you said, or even what you gave. It was your frequency. It was how your spirit marched in front of you. How your eyes stared through others, not simply looking at them. They couldn't change it. That's when the fascination began. They said it was love, but it was actually spiritual terror. You broke their illusion simply by being there. They couldn't control you with their rituals. They couldn't tell who you were based on your energy readings. You weren't scared of their might. You messed up their spell work without even trying. They had been practicing their job as celestial leader for years. But next to you, it all seemed like a play. They attempted to keep you in check by flattering you, being passive, or even making indirect threats. But nothing worked. And it made them crazy. You were too powerful to be deceived and too spiritually strong to be rattled. You didn't cause any drama. You brought holy chaos. They didn't feel affection. It was shocking for them to meet someone they couldn't manage, convert, or control. You were the bug in their system. That's why they still can't get over you. Second, they saw you as a danger to the ideology and studied you like one. You didn't merely bother someone. You messed up a whole way of thinking. They weren't studying you because they thought you were cool. They were looking at you because you were messing up the order that they had constructed their universe on. They thought you would act differently. You didn't fit into the roles they had previously set up for other people. You didn't feel impressed, scared, or bewildered. You asked inquiries without being afraid. You didn't look for solutions. You were the solution. That worried them. People like that aren't accustomed to being questioned without anybody saying anything. But the energy in your aura caused their mask fall off. They had made everyone around them believe that they were the most important spiritual figure. They had followers who were blindly devoted to them and a system that maintained them in charge. But everything changed when you got here. You didn't like their titles or their ceremonies. You saw the breaks. You could see the ego beneath the spiritual rhetoric. You can feel the performance behind the so-called serenity. And without even attempting, you made it difficult for them to ignore what they had buried behind layers of control and manipulation. They assumed you were simply another individual who was passing through. But when they realized that you weren't easily persuaded or influenced, they worried, but not in public. Not that, but softly. You were the one thing they couldn't guess. They began to monitor you, test you, throw shade at you, and see how you would react. But nothing worked. That's when the fascination became stronger, since they were trying to figure you out, but you could already see through them. They didn't want you to be around because you made them feel unsafe. You made them question their own intelligence, strength, and stories. You were everything they were claiming to be. That stung the most. You didn't have to say you were picked. You were just. And by just being yourself, you showed how empty their doctrines were. Not with arrogance, but with calm assurance that made their powers seem fake. They knew they weren't in charge of the room once you got there. That's why they began to see you as a danger. You weren't acting out. You were free. And in their world, the spirit of freedom is the most harmful of all. Third, your energy wasn't used up. It was too strong to eat. They couldn't take you in. That's what it actually came down to. They are accustomed to individuals melting in their hands. People who think that charm is love and control is safety. Most people break down when they are complimented, pressed, or put in a situation. That's correct. But you didn't give in. You didn't like the attention. When they attempted to hype you up or praise you in a sneaky way, you didn't fall for it. They believed they could get you to join them like everyone else, but you weren't spiritually weak or searching for a place to fit in. They were scared of you because you were born with your soul unmuted, unshaken, and undisturbed. They liked the concept of your power until they found out they couldn't manage it. You didn't praise them. You didn't use their words. You didn't follow their lessons. You held firm in what you knew. Not in a rude way, but obviously. And your lucidity was scary. You didn't need their help. You had your own fire. You didn't strive to fit in. Just by sticking up for what you believe in, you messed up everything. You were the hole in their plan. They got their power by controlling people and getting them to believe in their spiritual story. But you couldn't be sold a falsehood. You had already seen through. Something within them fell apart every time they attempted to identify you, define you, or correct you. They became more and more perplexed as they attempted to figure you out since you weren't behaving. You were, and they didn't have a guide for it. You weren't indoctrinated because you couldn't rent out your thoughts. Fear didn't shape your soul. It was made in the fire of God. At first, they believed you were simply another person they might help, but they soon discovered you were a leader. Someone who was meant to lead, not follow. Someone who didn't require help but made others confront their own lies. They couldn't forget you because they couldn't change you. 7. You got up. What they labored hard to hide. You didn't merely come into their lives. You messed up their past. You didn't judge when you stepped in. You brought back memories. And that memory troubled them long before they became guardians of fake spirituality. A lot of them were real searchers who were sensitive, insightful, and even talented in their own way. But at some point, they gave up their innocence in exchange for power. They stopped growing and began doing things. They stopped obeying God and began acting like God. Then you came, not polished, not power-hungry, not looking for a platform, simply pure. And that innocence wasn't stupid. It was something I knew. You looked like them before their ego took over. The entitlement came before the manipulation. The need to be idolized. Your presence drew on something that was deep within them. The initial plan, the one that made them cry during prayer and serve without wanting to be seen. That used to sense God without wanting to be in the limelight. And that's why they didn't like you. You were the mirror they had been avoiding for years. You didn't intend to do it. You weren't attempting to show them. But you're alone by yourself. Took apart their personality. It was like seeing a younger, whole version of themselves, and they couldn't deal with the sadness of what they had become. They sought to get close to you not only because they were curious, but because they were desperate to get back something they had given up on a long time ago. But instead of feeling guilty, they opted to eat. They believed that if they could take in your essence, they would feel complete again. But your light couldn't be moved. It wasn't borrowed. It was gained through agony, loneliness, and never-ending truth. So they struck out, not because you hurt them, but because you made them remember that you weren't just a person to them. You were a spirit, a mirror of the soul they buried to become who they are today. And seeing that ghost was too much. You didn't break them. You told them. And that's why they couldn't love you in a kind way. That's why they couldn't leave you alone. They gave up their lives for you deep down. And the one thing they couldn't take back. Hey, you can't be touched spiritually. And it makes them crazy. They used all they had against you. Mind tricks, flattery, ignoring someone, distorted beliefs, spiritual intimidation, and even slander campaigns. And you still didn't give up. You didn't give up. You didn't lost who you are. That's when they knew you weren't only unique. You were safe. You weren't being protected because you were weak. You were safe because you were a heavenly treasure. And everyone who attempted to mess with you without knowing it set off ancient repercussions. What they didn't get was that your covering wasn't religious. It was cosmic. It originated from a period before this one. Before the titles. Before the rights. You weren't simply another seeker who fell into their trap. You were a one. And it made them crazy. No matter how much they tried to change the story, they couldn't change your spirit. You weren't responding to their tricks because your soul was tuned into a frequency they couldn't block. There were more than just angels around you. You are one, but not the fragile variety that is used to make stained glass windows. You're the sort that was thrown out of poisonous systems and doesn't flinch in the dark. You walk with fire in your bones and warnings in your quiet. You didn't lose your elegance. You become stronger through battle. And it's the type of energy that makes demons sweat while they are in disguise. They assumed that changing your name would prohibit you from having an effect. Maybe you'd become smaller if they didn't pay attention to you. You may lose your way if they lured you. But nothing worked. Because you weren't attempting to make others like you. You didn't want to be followed. You were simply being dispatched. And the ones that are sent don't ask for platforms. They become the thunder that dries away the fakes. You can't put your spirit in a cage. That's what makes you a threat. You don't simply stroll. You really do have repercussions. They were scared of you because they couldn't control you, and you didn't have to fight back. Your appearance alone was a warning that certain ghosts are off bounce. It's not only stupid to attempt to touch something God has sealed. It's deadly. That's why they're falling apart. Not because you assaulted them, but because their weapons never hit. 9, they didn't want you to be a part of it. They wanted you to kneel. They never really wanted to say hello to you. From the time you entered their orbit, they intended to subdue you. They could see there was something about you that they couldn't put their finger on. You weren't readily wowed or wide-eyed. You didn't leap at the chance to get titles. You didn't praise their spiritual authority. And it was enough to make you a threat to their delusion. Because everyone in their universe had a job to do. The people who worshipped, the people who copied, and the people who went along with it. But you didn't come to play. You came in completely informed, grounded, and not at all connected with their secret plan. They never thought of you as an equal. They thought you were a danger since your light didn't need their approval to shine. You weren't asking to be picked. You already knew you were. That level of trust caused them fall apart. You didn't talk down to them, you spoke with authority. And it showed the gap between their practiced spirituality and your real spirituality. Their infatuation with you wasn't love. It was a victory. You stood for something. They couldn't make anything new. They intended to bend you, shape you, and make you rely on them. If they could manage you, someone who was clearly chosen, it would make their phony throne seem real. It would make their picture seem real. But when you didn't bow, break, or dumb yourself down to match their phony order, they had to confront the reality. They didn't have any real power. It was manipulation with smart marketing. They attempted to make you feel bad. You make them feel alone, you praise them, and you disgrace them. Anything to make you give in. But you didn't hold your stance because you were angry. You did it to remember. You recalled who you were, and you weren't going to give up your soul simply to make someone else feel like they were in charge of theirs. They didn't want your stuff. They wanted your bow. They didn't want another light. They sought a flicker they could catch, but you couldn't buy your flame. You weren't made to worship false gods. You were made to show them. And all you had to do to ruin their whole act was stand up straight without swinging. Number 10, you beat their titles without saying a word. They donned their titles like Armor Master Guru, Prophet, and High Priestess. They wanted those names to feel real, to be heard, and to have a say. But none of those titles could keep them from seeing the reality that your presence showed them when you walked in. You didn't provide a spiritual resume when you met me. You didn't have to. Your enthusiasm spoke louder than any introduction could have without speaking a word. You messed up the whole chain of command. They could feel the subtle strain, that order that wasn't voiced, that sense of being seen through, not simply being seen, because you didn't follow the guidelines for spiritual performance. You walked with true authority, not because you learned more or quoted better, but because your soul was strong in a way that others only claim to know. You don't get ahead of them by saying you do. You get ahead of them by becoming it. And it really disturbed them up since their titles were just clothes. It was a cloak of yours. Their support and following gave them strength. Your come from battle and alignment. They required followers and rituals to feel strong. All you had to do was breathe. And all of a sudden, the entire room changed. They spoke kind things about you in public, praised your gift, and called you exceptional. They even attempted to involve you to hide the fact that they were scared of you. Not because you were bad, but because you were honest. And your clear thinking made it impossible for them to keep up their lies. You didn't tell them what you were doing. Just by being honest, you showed them. That's the most terrifying form of exposure. When nothing is spoken, yet everything is known. They didn't know how to beat someone who wasn't trying to win. They didn't know how to mimic someone whose plan came from God. They didn't know how to shut up someone who wasn't even talking, but whose presence revealed all they were trying to conceal. You didn't take their crowns away. They never wore them in the first place. They simply never thought that someone without a title would come in with the weight of God's approbation. And that's what made you untouchable, memorable, and impossible to deny. First of all, they weren't attracted to your appearance. Your innocence scared them. They didn't like you because of how you appeared. They were taken aback by how pure your vibe was. You had a terrifyingly pure quality about you. And in their world, being pure isn't natural. It gets in the way. It's risky. It changes how often control, illusion, and performance happen. You weren't trying to impress anybody. You didn't come with crystals, candles, spiritual talk, or drama. You didn't appear powerful. You were in charge, and it came from your real, unvarnished presence. You were wholly even without the show. That type of purity, raw, unpolished, and unapologetic, is hard to find in a world where people try to seem spiritual. Your honesty ruined the whole performance. You didn't have to wear white robes or chant to show that you were on the right path. Your silence told me about storms you had been through. Your look said to be careful. Your walk had meaning. You didn't go after holiness. You were it, and they couldn't deal with it. Your innocence made them anxious. It made them think about what they had lost, given up, or given up on their road to power. They didn't only want to be close to it. They wanted to have it, to wear it like a gem that has been stolen. Some people tried to copy it in the hopes that it would give them the same degree of respect that you naturally attracted. Others tried to ruin it merely to show that your light might be as bad as theirs. And the worst among them wanted to completely destroy it. Because every time they saw you come in, they were reminded of how they had betrayed you. But your purity couldn't be purchased, replicated, or destroyed since it wasn't only on the surface. It came from discipline, from choosing alignment over acclaim, and from choosing truth when falsehoods were easier. They assumed that if they got near enough, they could take what made you distinct. But you couldn't give your light to anybody else. It happened because you followed your calling, not because you were close to theirs. That's why they were so interested in you. You didn't come to charm. You came to clean. That's why they never forgot about you. You became their reality and helped them experience every aspect of themselves, even if they attempted to hide it. They assumed it was long gone. Number. Your quiet didn't mean you gave up. It was a plan. They thought you were following their orders since you were quiet. But they didn't know they were in front of a strategist, not a weak person, when they were trying to figure you out. You were getting information. Every break, every change in energy that wasn't in tune, and every lesson that was really manipulation dressed up as knowledge. You saw it, everything. You weren't silent because you were afraid. You were silent because you were thinking. You weren't trying to fit in. You could tell who was genuine and who was just putting on a show to get attention, while others used tricks to get your favor. You sat back and looked at the stage. You watched the times when the mask came off. You saw how they utilized spirituality as a weapon, putting an end to those who asked questions, isolating those who didn't fit in, and giving rewards for blind allegiance as if it were wisdom. You saw how their energy changed when you didn't act like the others, when you didn't clap when you were supposed to, when you didn't give in to their fake brightness. They began to worry then, since they didn't know what you would do next. They couldn't quantify the power. You didn't act stupid because you weren't smart. You acted foolish because you understood that ego had to think less of you first. That provided you room to examine the full building properly without becoming stuck in it. You let them show you who they really were. And when you had seen enough, when the truth was too loud to ignore, you didn't fight. You didn't beg. You didn't do anything to correct it. You left, and you didn't simply walk away. You left without asking for your time, dignity, or soul back because they never had it. You didn't give up by being quiet. It was your armor. A providential delay gave you time to study the area, find out what was really going on, and wait for your escape path to become clear. And when it happened, you didn't make a sound. You made a difference. They had no idea it was coming. You were silently figuring them out the entire while they were attempting to brainwash you. That's why they're still scared. Because you didn't run away. You went up. And now they are wondering how someone they thought they had under control turned out to be the one with the sword the whole time. Number. Your leaving was the beginning of their decline. They assumed that getting rid of you would give them more power and that your absence would offer them peace and order. They didn't think that you leaving would be the start of their downfall, since you weren't simply another person in the room. You were the truth that held the entire thing together, even when they didn't realize it. You were the silent opposition in a system based on lies. And when you left, the mask didn't simply fall off. It broke. They were constantly uncomfortable with you, but it also kept the illusion going. You were the standard that everyone else followed. Even if you never said anything, other people unconsciously assessed everything by it. Your energy showed what was false, and when you weren't present to keep the vibe steady, everything they had constructed on fear, ego, and control started to fall apart on its own. People began to pay attention. The manipulation didn't go as planned. The charm didn't work the same way. The mood became heavier, more evident, and more strange. Because you weren't there to witness them, there was no more mirror to show their flaws and no more balance to make the craziness look spiritual. Some of the individuals who used to see you be shunned began to wake up. They recalled how you acted, how you moved, and how you never gave up. And it set something off. You became the silent witness that brought down the entire thing, not because you fought back, but because you left with your soul intact. That worried them more than anything else. Once the one they couldn't bend departs, everyone else begins to wonder why they ever bent in the first place. They lost more than just a follower. They might feel like they lost their sense of control. The energy is not the same. The eyes surrounding them are sharper. There are more questions now. The allegiance is weaker since you were never simply a quiet person in the background. You were the string. And now that you're not here, everything is falling apart. One stitch at a time, one line at a time. And all you did was leave Number. You didn't hurt them. They were already in pieces. You just said no to becoming next. When you met them, they were already breaking. You simply didn't join the other spirits who were ready to break up with them. You didn't create the harm. It was already there, concealed behind layers of charm, control, and fake sanctity. A long time before you got there. They were bleeding within. Their spiritual power was all a show. Fear and ego were woven into their confidence. But other people went along with it, promising allegiance in return for safety, acceptance, or a place to fit in. You weren't made that way. You spotted the flaws, the falsehoods that were hidden as truth, and the discrepancies. You could see they wanted force behind their sermons. You could see that they used love as a leash and acceptance as a prison. But instead of bowing, you stayed still. You didn't hold on, you asked. You didn't plan to, but you revealed the dysfunction without raising your voice. Being genuine in a phony world is enough to create problems. And when they couldn't shape you, they blamed you. They said you shattered something that was already broken. But you really don't want to be another broken piece of their messed up kingdom. You weren't mean. You weren't acting out. You simply wouldn't play along. You didn't want to act tiny so that someone else could feel large. You gave them the mirror and allowed them see themselves without any spiritual makeup, raw and unfiltered. That's what scares them. It's not what you did. It's what you didn't do. You didn't give up your voice to fit in. You didn't give up your ability to distinguish right from wrong to keep comfortable. You didn't let fear get the best of you. And it is the biggest danger in their universe. Others could start standing up too since you wouldn't bend. You didn't kill them. You didn't tell them about your plans for retribution or gossip. You left clean, clear, and entire. And that type of departure, it makes a sound. It becomes bigger. They can't explain away the mark it left because the one person they couldn't corrupt is now the one person they can't forget. And the reflection you left behind is still looking back at them. Every day, every lie, and every quiet, you were the truth. They attempted to get rid of it, but they couldn't. You weren't simply a problem. You were magnificent. Correction in the shape of a person. You didn't breach the systems. You showed their cracks. You didn't hurt leaders. You showed how empty they were. You didn't take followers. Your independence only made them want to know what freedom actually looks like. They wanted to put you in chains so desperately, but they could never possess your soul. You had a light that couldn't be purchased, changed, or corrupted. And that light burned every untruth that was wrapped up in spiritual jargon. You weren't sent to bow. You were sent to end a spell. And you did, not with violence or ego, but with unshakable truth and the strength to walk away. They could still be attempting to change the narrative, but the truth is evident. You were the one they couldn't control. Your absence is hurting their illusion more than your presence ever did to all the selected ones watching. If this would touch your heart, make you feel noticed, affirmed, or woken, don't simply read on. This is your area. This is your group. If this message touched you deeply, don't simply sit there. Go with it. You are not the only one. This is a place for the awakened, the selected, and the misfit warriors who won't be tamed. Join the channel, so you never miss a drop of heavenly truth that backs up what you've always thought but couldn't quite put into words. If this made sense to you, hit the like button. It tells us you're out there and on the same page. Please leave a comment below so that your voice may be heard. What section hurt the most? What have you made it through? We read it everything. Send this movie to someone who has gone through spiritual manipulation, silent conflicts, or unseen warfare. Just as you did, they need this validation. And if you really want to go down this route, switch on the notification bell. You're the first to know when the latest spiritual download comes out. You don't want to miss what's coming next, trust me. This channel isn't only about the material, it's also about confirmation. It's a community. For those who never quite fit in because they weren't supposed to, it's spiritual clarity. They were meant to shatter the mold. Now go shine without feeling bad about it. And simply by being truthful, you can keep shaking things up. We can see you. We respect you. And we are going on this trip with you. Let's keep moving together. God bless you.